The most simplest way to check the mechanical health of your engine is to plug a vacuum gauge into one of the vacuum lines. So this $20 tool from Amazon will tell you if your valves are working correctly in your cylinder head. I won't go too deep into this because I honestly don't rebuild engines. All I know is green means good. For the most part, it still could have some other problems. The combustion engine, a gasoline engine, is basically a vacuum. So it should be pulling about 20 to 25 inches of mercury. So you're going to snap the throttle and it should go to 0. If this gauge is fluttering, you need to buy a new cylinder head or get a valve job. The second part of the mechanical health of the engine is substantially more complicated. So this job is particularly easy because it is a 4-cylinder car. So we need to remove the spark plugs, and that usually means removing the intake system. Pulling the first spark plug out will tell you how the engine is more or less running. So there is a substantial amount of oil going into this combustion chamber, so likely the valve seals are worn out. So this is a Toyota, so the tubes that hold the spark plug are also sealed into the cylinder head. The vacuum gauge said the valves are working correctly, but clearly some oil is getting into the combustion chamber. Considering this truck is basically almost as old as me, I'm not surprised. Moving on to the compression test. So I have this Amazon kit that costs $20 and it has a soft hose with a thread on the end. So if you have a Toyota, it's 14 by 125. Make sure you get that spark plug compression tester adapter. So because this is a $20 tool, it's not particularly ergonomic and it's pretty hard to thread into the cylinder head because of the rubber hose. So now the compression gauge is hooked up, we need to do 2 steps. We need to find the specification for our compression test, and if you have an old jalopy car, this is called charm.com. It's got these old school repair manuals. So our specification for the 4-cylinder 4Runner is at least 127 psi. 50% chance you can go underneath the hood into the fuse box and disengage the fuel system. So you still need the starter to crank, but you need to shut the fuel pump off, and on this Toyota it's the EFI fuse. The battery sounded pretty weak when you're cranking, so technically you're supposed to put constant voltage to the car while you're cranking to get a consistent measurement, but here is the DIY hack fix: jumper cables and a second battery. So we need to retest number 1 cylinder. This is a pretty stressful test on your car's electrical and starter system, so I did not reset the gauge, but we can see it is moving with some additional voltage. Comparing it to the before one, both of them have adequate compression to keep driving the car. All we want to know is that it has at least 125, it's got 300,000 miles. The spark plug needs to go back in the hole you just tested to continue on with the compression test, so it's super important to use a torque wrench, and you're about to find out here why shortly. Don't forget to reset the gauge back down to 0 before starting your new compression test. While doing a compression test, it's a good idea to take a look at the spark plugs. That's not oil on this one. This one actually has coolant on it, so I got some seeping head gaskets. This is an overall engine health check. It's not necessarily a diagnosis job, and I just found a blown head gasket, but there's a massive difference between worn out piston rings and just doing a simple head gasket. Moving into cylinder 3, we have a solid 150 psi of compression, so the front 2-cylinder piston rings are pretty weak, and number 2 has a blown head gasket because it was definitely coolant. So the middle cylinder is pretty common for them to blow head gaskets because there is a fine ridge between each cylinder. It's a good idea to remove the janky second battery while plugging in the new spark plug. So here is cylinder 4 spark plug, and I want you to find out what's wrong with this. I actually did a tune-up on this truck like 2 months ago and found a stripped out spark plug hole, so that's why it's so important to torque the spark plugs down. So I put a new time cert into this, and fingers crossed. Good compression on number 4 with the time cert installed. I saved this spark plug as a souvenir. It's actually the spark plug that came out of the stripped out hole 2 months ago. So what would cause mechanical damage to the electrode part of a spark plug and allow the engine to still run? With compression numbers between 130 and 140, I'm guessing you could get 50 to 100,000 miles out of this engine. The problem is every single oil seal and head gasket is leaking on this truck. This is a long series of videos restoring this classic 1997 third generation 4Runner. So if you want to see the entire build, click this playlist on your screen.